Something really strange is happening in the Indian state of Meghalaya. On one hand, the government is celebrating a big drop in youth unemployment. Sounds great, right? But on the other hand, they're also admitting there's a huge job shortage. So, how can both of those things be true? Let's dig in and figure this out. Yeah, it all boils down to this one really baffling question. If the unemployment numbers are supposedly going down, but the gap between jobs and job seekers is getting bigger, where on earth are 67,500 young people disappearing to every single year? That's the puzzle we're going to try and piece together today. So, to really get what's going on, first we have to look at the completely conflicting story coming from official statements. Okay, so check out the timeline because this is where it gets really weird. In March, you have the government patting itself on the back for a big drop in the number of registered unemployed youth. Fast forward just 6 months to September, and the chief minister himself admits something pretty shocking. There's an annual job deficit of 67,500. So that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How can you have fewer people officially signing up as unemployed while the actual gap between people needing jobs and the jobs that exist is turning into this massive canyon? It just doesn't seem to add up. To get to the bottom of this, we've got to look past the flashy headlines. It's time to unmask these numbers and see what's really going on. The source we're looking at calls this a statistical sleight of hand. And, it's a classic move. You take one statistic that looks good, in this case, fewer people registering for unemployment, and you hold it up as proof of success, all while you're ignoring the much bigger and much worse crisis happening right behind the curtain. So here's the kicker. The drop in registrations, it's not a sign of success. Not at all. It's actually a symptom of what the source calls a disillusionment cycle. Think about it like this. Young people, full of hope, go and register for a job. But then nothing happens. No real opportunities, no placements. So what do? They just give up. They stop registering because, well, what's the point? And then that drop in numbers gets spun as a success story. Wild, right? And this is where the official narrative just completely falls apart. If you look at the real data from the Periodic Labor Force Survey, Meghalaya's urban youth unemployment rate is sitting at 12.3%. Now get this, that's more than double the national average for India. So the reality on the ground is the total opposite of what those registration numbers would have you believe. And this isn't just a problem in the cities. When you zoom out and look at the whole region, the picture gets even clearer. That same report confirms that out of all the states in Northeast India, Meghalaya has the highest unemployment rate, period. But these are way more than just numbers on a chart. They represent a really deep and honestly devastating cost for an entire generation. Just look at this number, 337,500. That absolutely staggering number is what you get when a job deficit of 67,500 people piles up year after year since just 2020. We're talking about an entire generation of young people who are being left behind with no prospects. And these aren't just numbers on a page. The human cost is just devastating. We're talking about young people forced to leave their homes and families just to find work, often landing in these really exploitative jobs with terrible pay and zero security. The source points out that this kind of widespread hopelessness is also linked to serious social problems, like a rise in crime and substance abuse. It's truly, as the source puts it, a societal waste of human potential. So, how is this massive crisis being handled? The analysis we're breaking down uses a pretty powerful metaphor. It calls the current strategy the employment theater. So this table really breaks down the performance versus the reality. The performance, what's happening on stage, is the government announcing all these skill training programs. But the reality is, are there any actual jobs waiting at the end? Then you have the big show of holding recruitment exams. The reality? You have a tiny 3.5% chance of actually getting one of those jobs. The performance involves blaming young people for not being employable, while the reality is that there's no clear path for them to become employable. And the grand finale? Celebrating those falling registration numbers when we now know they're a sign of pure despair. It's all a show, and it's hiding a really deep crisis. Okay, so if the whole thing is just a performance, what does a real path forward look like? Well, the analysis leaves us with 3 really critical questions we need to ask. First up, They've announced 25 different areas for skill training, which sounds impressive, but where's the proof it's working? The question here is all about accountability. How many of these programs can actually show that they get more than half of their students a real job? Second question, and this one really gets to the heart of it. Think about all the young people who put their trust in the employment exchange last year. How many of them, what percentage, were actually placed in a job by that same system? I mean, is the main government tool for employment even doing its job? And that leads us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. Look, if the government itself admits it can only provide a measly 3.5% of the jobs that are needed, then why is almost all the effort and focus still on government jobs? Why isn't, say, 90% of the energy going into building up a private sector that could actually create enough jobs for everyone? It just seems like a massive disconnect between the problem and the solution. And in the meantime, the future of an entire generation is just left hanging in the balance.